There appears to be a defining crisis in Alberta politics this week, and it involves Bigfoot. Yeah, there's a Netflix movie where Bigfoot vanishes and his family goes out to save him. Now, the bad guy in the movie is the oil industry. The Alberta War Room launched a campaign telling Netflix, listen guys, you got to tell the truth, enough of this. And to talk more about this in detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, joining me from Edmonton. Tyler, the UCP have been attacking the film while the NDP say the attack really is a national embarrassment.
Certainly, this is, as you say, the big crisis in Alberta politics right now. Netflix family film, it's called Bigfoot Family. The gist of it, Bigfoot goes missing, and the family goes after him. They end up sort of entangled with this resource extraction oil company in Alaska. Now, part of it is that they plan to extract oil by dropping bombs and things like that, which, funnily enough, actually was a strategy considered in Alberta back in the 50s. But anyways, the War Room launched an attack, says, tell Netflix to tell the truth. You know, a few thousand people have signed this letter saying it's spreading misinformation about the oil and gas industry. This happened, I think, late last week. And, admittedly, a bunch of us were sort of scratching our heads to just, double checking to make sure this was a real thing and not, a joke. But no, it was real. And the Premier's been out defending the attack by the War Room against Netflix, the Energy Minister, and the NDP, as you say, saying, come on, you guys, you're going after a kid's film. Do you want the Lorax ban next? So it's been a little bit of drama over this, but, maybe on the flip side, it's a little bit lighter fare than we're usually seeing on the political front these days.
But you know something, Tyler? I'm thinking people are going after Dr. Seuss lately. They went after Mr. Potato Head. Hey, why not? Take a shot at a kid's movie too, kid's film too, right?
May as well, I suppose, yeah.
More people have been discussing the potential of a sales tax here in Alberta. I have to be careful I don't say those words too loudly. But polling from Angus Reid says even if academics like the idea, the majority of Albertans do not, and that includes supporters of both the UCP and the NDP.
Yeah, if you take it all the way across the board, about 62% of Albertans don't want a sales tax of any size. So that would be 1 to 2%, 3 or 4, 5 or more. Nobody is really that fond of it. Now, of course, you could flip that poll on its head and say, 38% of Albertans actually do want a sales tax, a sizable minority. You could frame it that way. But what is sort of relevant about this majority, this solid majority of people that don't want it across all age groups, and I should say more or less across all income levels, is that Jason Kenney has said if there is going to be a PST in this province, it's going to come in via referendum, which of course means that the majority view in polling is going to matter. And there is a little bit of variation. For example, in those that make more than $100,000, what Angus Reid found was that about 45% of them actually support a PST. And then if you go to the other end of the spectrum, those making $50,000 a year or less, only 35% of them support it. The idea that a progressive sales tax, a provincial sales tax is not, in fact, progressive, affects the poor more than the wealthy. So strong headwinds ahead should any government ever actually get around to attempting to put in a PST. But as we talked about the other week, it's political suicide tax. So we'll have to see if anyone ever tries to give it a go.
Well, yeah, I mean, that would take away the Alberta advantage, definitely. The only province in Canada without a PST. Now, there's also been a discussion on budget estimates, Tyler. Now, it appears as though we will not be able to balance the budget in Alberta for quite some time here. Alberta is still coming out of the recession, plus we've had the COVID-19 pandemic. In question period in QP, the talk was about homelessness and municipal spending. Tell me more.
That's right. So there's sort of the estimates in the budget, the numbers in the budget that we've all seen. There are sort of discussions ongoing about all of that, where they sort of dig into the numbers a little bit more. So there's been questions, as you said, about funding for homelessness, funding for housing, municipal transfers. The War Room, of course, came up this week because they were asking about how much the War Room is being paid to do its job. So it's just the budget conversation, I guess, what I'm trying to say is continuing and is a subject of discussion within the legislature, and that's eating up a fair amount of time in question period, in between all the usual fun mudslinging that is happening.
Now, the UCP has gone through a rewrite of the education curriculum, and in the Northwest Territories, students there actually learn the Alberta curriculum, and the NDPs say that with the UCP rewrite, educators in the territories may be dropping the curriculum Or, Tyler, is that a bit of an inaccurate speculation?
Well, it's a little bit unclear. You're right. The NDP has said that they've been told by sources, I guess, in the Northwest Territories government that they are going to switch to the British Columbia curriculum. Now, inaccurate speculation is exactly what the education minister in Alberta called it, saying that this is part of an ongoing and normal review that the territory does. And that part of it is true as well. The territory is going through a normal review, and it's looking at curricula in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Yukon, and Nunavut. So it remains to be seen a little bit whether or not they actually switch to another curriculum or if they keep Alberta's. Now, this, of course, goes all the way back to this controversy we had some time ago when the curriculum review panel ended up in controversy because of some of the people who'd been on the panel who critics felt had, I guess you might say, socially conservative or historically conservative views. So it's just a little bit of a way, I suppose, that the NDP is keeping some of the air in the sails on the education controversy, so to speak. But as of this exact moment, of course, we don't actually know for sure what the Northwest Territories is going to do.
Here's a question as well. Why don't educators and legislators in the Northwest Territories write their own curriculum, education curriculum?
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually have no idea, and I was surprised learning about it that the Yukon and Nunavut do have their own. So it is a bit, actually, honestly, a bit of a mystery to me why they haven't done their own as well.
Tyler, was promised during the last provincial election, and the UCP finally delivered recall legislation. I've asked a couple of politicians about it here, and yeah, it makes them a little bit nervous about it. Now, this would allow locals to potentially fire their MLAs. It would also apply to municipal leaders, including mayors and councillors. Now, explain how this really works, the recall legislation.
Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated and tricky than it sounds like on the face of it. Now, you'd mentioned that Alberta is the only place without a provincial sales tax. If we got a recall, we would be only one of two provinces that has recall legislation, the other one, of course, being British Columbia. Now, the breakdown of how this would go about works like this. In order to set up the recall of a provincial politician, you need 40% of all constituents to sign this recall form, shall we say. This will then lead to a constituency-wide referendum. That referendum is done on a simple majority vote, so 50 plus 1. If the recall side wins, the politician gets yanked and it goes to a by-election. Now, it's a little bit different on the municipal front. A municipal politician can be recalled with 80% of the local voters, but once that comes in, it's finished. They're out. There's no constituency referendum. And it also applies to school board trustees, which has an even lower threshold, I believe, of 40% of voters as well. So it's kind of interesting in the sense that some people are saying, this is anti-democratic because it's way too hard for people to recall their politicians. And then you have other people saying this is anti-democratic, it's way too easy. So it's sort of trying to set, a little bit of a balance where the government obviously wants to have some sort of stability. And if the NDP were in government, certainly they would want this stability as well. But they're also fulfilling this sort of grassroots promise to have recall legislation available. So we'll have to see if it ever gets used because, I mean, it's an awful lot of legwork to get out and collect all those signatures to organize this sort of thing.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, a number of years ago, isn't that how Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor of California? Because Californians enacted their recall legislation, weren't happy with their governor, fired him, and that's how Schwarzenegger got in? Do you remember that?
I honestly can say I do not remember that,
Okay.
but I would believe it. California, you think Alberta politics are crazy, man. California's way wilder.
And they had the Terminator for a while, so there you go. Now, Premier Jason Kenney is beaming a little more these days, Tyler, after he said his party has delivered around 75% of their campaign promises, including this recall legislation. Now, you believe that the annual general meeting could get a little rambunctious, maybe 6 months before the next election? Can you explain?
Yeah, that's right. Jason Kenney is going to face a leadership review. So brass tacks of that, the UCP membership's going to decide if they want Jason Kenney to lead their party into the next election. These things are ran from the grassroots of the party. He can't really stop this sort of thing. So it's going to happen. There's no obvious successor to Jason Kenney, obviously. He does have parties tracking to his right. He does have, relatively low approval ratings, but that I don't think is abnormal, sort of midterm and in the middle of a pandemic. But yeah, the party's going to have to think about it. He's going to have to think about it. And of course, The big thing that you mentioned is that it'll only be 6 months before the next election, which would give them very little time to get their house in order if they intend to win that election.
The NDP plans a private member's bill here in Alberta that would ban coal mining and exploration on the eastern slopes of the Canadian Rockies. What has the UCP really said about it?
Well, they've been asked about it in question period a couple times recently, and they've basically said that when the NDP was in government, they supported coal exploration, and the UCP government supports coal workers, people in rural communities, things like that. Now, this, of course, is happening in this much larger context about coal exploration and the changes to the 1976 coal policy that they changed and then decided not to change. And I believe now they're doing a sort of public consultation on what to do about coal. But of course, the big issue down in southern Alberta, in the communities west of Lethbridge there. And just on Wednesday, Corb Lund, the country singer, put out another sort of statement video thing saying people need to keep an eye on it. So, what happens with a private member's bill is a little bit unclear at this point. It's not likely to wildly change the situation, but it's clear it's going to be a political hot potato, let's say, for the next little while. No doubt about that.
And speaking of country singers, Paul Brandt also came out against a lot of the coal mining too, right? So that's quite interesting there. Tyler, the UCP recently announced that Southern Alberta will be receiving some new schools, including a much-needed elementary school here in Lethbridge on the west side. We have so much high density there, we desperately need one. But Lethbridge isn't the only jurisdiction receiving a new Southern Alberta school.
That is correct. There are 3 all total. The one you mentioned in Lethbridge, and I believe Coaldale and Milk River are also going to get schools. So this is the result of funding set aside for new schools in budget 2021, around $1 billion, I think, is the number. And the announcement was made just a few days ago. No estimates available yet on what these projects might cost. I believe in 2 cases, at least, it's going to be the demolition of an old school and the building of another one. So a few years off yet on these projects, but folks in Coaldale, Milk River, and Lethbridge can look forward to new schools. Well, in the next few years at some point.
Yeah, that'll be tremendous. Now let's talk about safety for just a moment here. A private member's bill is suggesting to raise the speed limit on some Alberta highways to 120 kilometers an hour. Some say these highways were specifically engineered for that speed, not 100, not 110, but other experts are saying increasing the speed limit is not a good idea, citing some higher crash stats in BC when they did something similar in 2014. But Tyler, don't most Albertans speed in our highways anyway?
Well, it certainly depends on the highway, I would say. You'd be hard-pressed to find someone on Highway 2 who's going along at the speed limit. But yeah, this would, if it goes ahead, make this sort of change official. So you wouldn't be ticketed for going, 117 anymore. But yes, as you say, British Columbia did this, and some of the experts have sort of said that there is, I think, 180% increase in crashes or something like that because of it. Now, of course, a percent number like that is meaningless to some extent because it could have gone from 2 crashes to 10 crashes and gone up a whopping percentage. But yeah, it's certainly a balance between safety and the efficiency of the highway. So it's an interesting one, though, because as you say, no one actually goes the speed limit. So it'll be interesting to see if politicians, sort of nod to the fact that everyone's already kind of speeding and make it legitimate or not.
It's interesting as well. I've interviewed a lot of police officers over the years who told me that going under the speed limit by, 10, 15, 20K, not when it's icy, but dry road conditions, can also cause accidents. So, you're going to speed, you're going to go under the speed limit, maybe just do the speed limit would be safest. Our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks for joining me once again from Edmonton.
Pleasure as always, Hal.